Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Perceptive Learning Zone. And today we continue on that discussion that we were having previously. And today's session features an in-depth discussion of corporate executive power abuse as well as security violations. So we do know that corporate executives, they have in general more power than others in an organization. And some of them, well, they abuse their power and override these security controls. Now, this is often due to a lack of knowledge about security risk management and consequences of the data breach incidents. After all, which executive wants to deal with the aftermath of data breach incidents, especially if they're already disclosed in media and the public forums, right? So I would say that when it comes to security, policies are designed to manage the security risks and they must be applied to everyone consistently in order to maintain security. You got different level of control, such as segregation of duties, manager approval, the principle of least privilege, and system security standards, which are implemented to safeguard any organization from many security risks that the companies are facing. And ignoring such controls, it leaves major risks that are substantially unaddressed for the companies. Now, executives, like all other employers, ladies and gentlemen, they should not be exempt from following any of the company policies, procedures, or any of the internal controls that are in place in order to ensure the safeguard of the company assets, including confidential information. So, usually, when policies and procedures are not followed or are overridden, sometimes by the same people who created and approved them, it becomes extremely difficult to monitor the deviations, even if policy exceptions have been formally submitted. If policy violations lead to inappropriate access and activities, it also becomes extremely difficult to immediately detect such security violations because the detective controls are also sometimes being eliminated, manipulated, bypassed, or ignored altogether. Um, so, what I would say is that such violations they may be detected during subsequent internal or external audits, but it may be too late by then because a security breach for even a short period of time, well, it will lead to serious consequences. Now, why is it that some executives are abusing power and overriding security policies? Well, it would be, first of all, they may not even know that their actions constitute control override as well as policy violations. Um, they are not fully aware of the consequences of their violations, which might lead to inadequate controls or lack of controls. There's also a possibility that executives are abusing power and overriding security protocols because they're busy and they don't perceive that the same stringent or strict controls and rules apply to them as well. They may think that they do not pose any risk to the company if they violate the policies, and or there's a possibility they might be planning to commit fraud. They could think they could get away with it due to their positions and sense of perceived entitlement and rights in the company. And also, there's a possibility that they might not even have requested such override, and that override was merely granted due to their perceived sense of entitlement. So, when executives abuse power and they override controls knowingly, it can be very malicious and much more dangerous. So, for example, such power abuse can be intended to commit fraud, which can cost the company immensely. Um, Also, we talk about the transferring of rights. So, in some instances, executives they share their passwords to systems. They share their system passwords and email credentials with their assistants for some tasks which might be very generic, which they would prefer would be better if they delegated to their assistants. And sometimes they don't have time to request a password reset or complete the task themselves. So by doing so, what happens is that the executives they share their privileged access rights to set to sensitive company information and emails with their assistants, and therefore, even just for a short period of time, they are placing the company at risk unknowingly. Uh, Although the decision to share passwords with someone is intentional and careless, consequences of such decision and introduction of additional risks for the company, they cannot be ignored. So when executives abuse power unknowingly, their actions may not be malicious, but they can still be dangerous for the company. There are many cases of control override without a formal exception request. One example is the automatic granting of access to restricted areas to the executives. Uh, the person or group responsible for securing a restricted area, like the server room, for example, automatically, it grants the CEO or the president of the company access to such restricted area if they are automatically entitled to it, even if they have not requested it. Often, the person in charge of securing the restricted area or system is fearful for his job when he or she is asked to grant access to an executive or even remove unneeded executive access. So these observations, they lead us to believe that some employees in a company may believe that executives are entitled to unrestricted access, and therefore they grant them such access even if they are not requested, or they would not question executive request for unneeded access or control override. Some executives may believe the company rules do not apply to them. Employees may think that it may not be worth to fight an executive for compliance and risk of losing the job. So, in conclusion, what is the need of the hour? In order to maintain a sound internal control environment and address all these instances of non-compliance, executives should be expected to support and follow the same policies that one of their peers or the board created, approved, and expects everyone in the company to follow. It should also be clearly communicated to all employees that executives are not exempt from following company policies and are subject to the same rules and policies that everyone else in the ballgame. Often, independent internal parties who are responsible for monitoring the existence of and compliance with internal controls, they are reluctant to follow up on cases when executives they abuse power, especially if such abuse is minor or for fear of losing their jobs. However, the risk on hand is not always about the executive's intentions, which may be innocent, but rather how others can take advantage of reduced controls, whether the executives abuse power directly or indirectly. And according to Henry Bagdasarian, this is a nightmare for CEOs because they must decide between pushing back on executive requests this is a nightmare for CEOs because they must decide between pushing back on excessive requests from executives, directors, and managers who feel special and risk losing alliances and the job, or allowing some exceptions while being accountable for security audit findings or data breach incidents when they occur. So we'll be back with more engaging content. Hope you found this a bit reflective. Please do not hesitate to like, share, and subscribe. I will be back with much more illuminating content. Thank you very much, fellas, and stay blessed. Assalamu alaikum.